Well, Carolyn,
back again.
The second one of these podcasts, What Kind of World? And just a thanks to the comments that we received on the first one. So that was helpful for some of the comments, and nice to have a bit of feedback. So do feel free to, especially obviously on the YouTube, it's easier for putting comments on, but it's good for us to see what folks are thinking and saying. So for our second podcast, we were thinking about maybe trying to explore some of the area around why we have kind of different perceptions and different understanding of morality and ethics, how we see the world.
Yeah, so why do good people come up with such very, very different moral outlooks?
Yeah.
Right? Because that happens a lot.
And many years ago, well, 2012 it must have been, 2013, something like that, we both read a book by Jonathan Haidt, who is an author.
He's a psychology professor, I think, at the University of Virginia. At least he was at the time.
Yes, I think he's still
there.
I'm not sure if it's there, but he's a social psychologist, is his kind of field. And he'd written a book that was called The Righteous Mind, and it was why good people disagree so much about politics and about religion.
Religion, the kind of two topics you're never supposed to talk about, but that our family talks about all the time.
Exactly. So we thought it might be useful to use some of what Jonathan Haidt talks about in his book as a way of, now it's not the be all and end all, but it's maybe a helpful tool for trying to understand a little bit of the kind of diversity there is in us individually and across society.
Yeah, and if you're wanting to have a kind world, you've got to find some way to understand and talk to people who think differently than you do, which I think is one of the problems the world as a whole is having at the moment. I mean, I know in the States, if you are on different sides of the political divide, you basically can't talk to each other because you seem to have such completely different outlooks, completely different views of reality as well. But I think trying to pick apart why something that seems obviously bad to me doesn't seem obviously bad to people I know and love, who I know are good people, trying to understand why we come to such different conclusions.
So this is partly why, quite deliberately, I'm wearing a football top today, thinking about that kind of tribalism that there can be. And Aberdeen is in some ways lucky. It only has one team in the Scottish Premier League, whereas some of the other cities around Scotland have two teams, and Celtic Rangers, the ones that you obviously think about, and then that creates this instant kind of tribal disagreement between the different groups.
Whereas in Aberdeen, you just have to support Aberdeen no matter how they're doing,
with the ups and the downs.
Yeah.
So what we could do is just watch a little clip of Jonathan Haidt talking a little bit about
his
ideas, and then we'll come back and maybe unpack a little of that, and especially these kind of different categories that he has for thinking about our
moral judgments.
Yeah.
So good.
Let me put on this wee video. It's just part of an interview with a guy called John Anderson. So let's listen to what he has to say.
People on the left tend to prioritize issues of care and compassion. That's the number one moral foundation. And then also, everybody cares about fairness, but on the left, especially fairness as equality has a special ring. Whereas on the right, equality outcome is of no importance. Quality of opportunity is important for everybody, but proportionality tends to be more what the right means by fairness. So if do the crime, do the time. If some of you do something wrong, you need to be punished. Is a kind of proportionality. And then the big difference, though, is that people on the social conservatives, not libertarians, but social conservatives, also value group loyalty, respect for authority and tradition, and a sense of sanctity or purity. Again, everybody understands these personally, but the sort of the public philosophy, the governing philosophy of the left is based more and more on care and compassion for the vulnerable, and on the right is based more on sort of group cohesion, protecting the group, make America great, defend our borders, build a wall, restore tradition, those sorts of things. And that's actually great. I mean, it's good. That's like a real yin-yang sort of thing that you want to have. The left tends to drive forward the rights revolutions. I thought that we'd gotten full rights for women over the previous decades. Since the rights revolutions of the '60s, I thought things were going pretty well. But then you learn, well, actually, there was a lot more sexual harassment than we realized, and that's always pushed by the left. But at the same time, the left tends to pursue policies that, at least nowadays, that will pit groups against each other, and that I think can make it more difficult to run institutions nowadays. There are a variety of problems with the way that identity politics is pursued. You have to have identity politics, but there are different formats of it. All I'm saying is, this little portrait of the left and the right, it means that they should be together in one system. You need a yin and a yang pushing in different directions. The problem is that human beings are so good at tribalism, at us versus them, that there's a certain, let's say, parameter setting, a certain level of conflict which is ideal, and if you ramp it up too much, it becomes really destructive. For example, intramural sports competitions. If you have teams at a university and they divide up into sports teams and they play each other, they don't hate each other. A little rivalry is actually good, and it makes them love their in-group more, and it makes them not really hate the out-group more. So a little rivalry is good, it stimulates effort, it's more fun. But if you ramp it up too high, you get English soccer hooligans. You get people who actually want to smash the skulls of the other people with a pipe. And that's where we are in American politics, at least. Again, not for the majority of people, but for those who are really active. It's getting more. There hasn't been much physical violence yet, but we're moving that. Okay,
so that's just a short clip from Jonathan Haidt and what he had to say there. So he, well, just as before we go any further, I thought it was interesting, his comment about, we thought that the women's situation rights for women was right. I was like, well, that's a white man speaking. He thought everything was fine. Yep. And then it turns out things weren't.
Not so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep. He uses this image of the elephant and the rider.
In his book.
And
it's important, I think, to understand that before you go any further. Mm-hmm. So it's this kind of social intuition. He thinks that and he has a lot of experimental evidence for this, that our moral judgments come from what he calls social intuition. So we have these intuitions. It's not reasoning. We're not kind of rationally working our way to these kind of moral impulses. They're just impulses. They're intuitions, and they're shaped by the society that we live in, which makes them social. So that different people in different societies will have different social intuitions depending on how that society has developed.
So those are the kind of, would you say that's the kind of, I mean, almost, some folks talk about like the lizard brain. It's almost an autonomous
like gut feelings.
It's a gut feeling. Would it be the same? There's a lot in the last year or two of folks talking about vibes.
Maybe.
Is I'm
a little bit too old for that. But yeah.
But it's that just, it feels wrong. Or
yes.
Right, or whatever it is. It's
the kind of thing that if a roach drops in your meal and then someone expects you to eat it, you just are immediately going to be like, ugh, no way, right?
But in some cultures, a fried
Oh,
insect
yeah.
is
Let's not go
a
there.
delicacy. But that's the
Yeah,
cultural difference that you're talking about, though.
Yeah, so these intuitions, our intuitions come first. They come before the reasoning. So the intuitions in his analogy are the elephant. So there's this massive elephant. That is our gut feeling, so to speak, right? And then the rider on top of the elephant, who's kind of maybe steering, but not really, thinks he's steering the elephant, but the elephant is really in control, is our rational thought, is our justifications, our ideas, our reasons why, well, you should help this person because, or you shouldn't eat the food because. The intuitions are already there. You automatically recoil from the food. You automatically want to help someone who is more vulnerable. And then your writer adds all of these, oh, this is why.
Now, for me, there's an interesting kind of corollary here between when thinking about consciousness and how your brain works, in that there have been experiments done that show that you physically act quicker than your brain is able to do the conscious rationalization, but you think you've made the choice to hit that button or wherever it might be, but in fact it's like an automatic, and then there's a layer of consciousness that provides the explanation.
So a lot of questions about free will there as well. Yeah, so
for another time.
Yeah.
Maybe. Yes. So, but the key thing here is that the bigger part of the
moral
that kind of moral decision
making
making is almost automatic. It's a kind of gut feeling things that happen, and then the kind of logical thinking about it and making an argument as to why I did that is an extra layer on top.
Yeah, and of course that's a lot of the reasons why. So when we're talking with someone who we disagree with, we each have different moral intuitions. Our elephants are leaning in different directions, and then on top, our writers individually are coming up with rationalizations for what we already think. And then when we share our reasoning seems great to me, but if I'm sharing it to you and you don't share that, then psychology actually tells us that when I give you lots of reasons why you're wrong, even if my facts are right and your ideas are wrong, your elephant is so much stronger than the rider that actually my facts showing you you're wrong are going to make you believe the wrong thing even more. Right? And that's the strength of the elephant, the strength of these kind of moral intuitions that we have.
Yeah.
So you can see why conversations across political divides become really, really tricky and can easily become heated, especially in the kind of political climate we've got around the world. And I mean, in America, but
in
everywhere
the UK
really
and
as well.
Across Europe, and you're seeing it around the world. Yeah. Okay, so that's the kind of the sort of image that Haidt puts in your mind and thinking about, right, that's kind of how things are clicking in the decisions that we make and the options that we choose as a result of all that. And he mentioned in that video, just kind of in passing, some of the emphasis that you might have for particular groups.
Yes.
And we would be aware of this ourselves as folks that are more on the kind of the left or progressive side of things, that the kind of care, harm kind of dimension of things is something
more
that
important to us, or is very important to us.
And kind of justice and things like that are important drivers for a sense of morality and ethics.
Yeah, so what Haidt does is once he gives you this analogy of the elephant, these are your moral intuitions and they're really running the show. And then your writer is your rational justifications for these moral intuitions that you already have. So he kind of sets up that analogy, and then they kind of went through and looked at, evolutionarily speaking, what are the different bases of our morality. So there are lots of different things that we look at and we think, yes, that's right, that's wrong. And they're saying their idea is that developed from kind of evolutionary necessity, right? So he comes up with 5 initial ones and then added a 6th one. So he has 5 different kind of moral foundations and then a 6th moral foundation. And then how different societies weight these moral foundations will give you, or how different people weight these moral foundations will give you different ideas of morality. And so if I'm weighting care harm really heavily, I'm really putting an emphasis on caring for people, and someone else is weighting kind of loyalty or... So
maybe
I guess
we probably should go through what
they
they
are. Yeah, maybe I'm getting ahead of myself.
Exactly. This enthusiasm.
Enthusiasm is
subject.
good, yeah.
So the first of them is about care. The kind of this spectrum between care and
caring
harm.
for vulnerable groups, caring for people who have been harmed, caring for people who need help. He thinks the kind of theory is that it would come from this kind of caring for a newborn. Yeah. Right? Groups where you had the adults who were much more in tune to caring for their newborns would have been more successful. And then, of course, now it's not just caring for newborns. We can apply this kind of foundation to lots of different things, and we do. But so that would be the first one. And
so the kind of the other side of it is harm. Yeah. So it's care and harm.
Caring, taking care of, and preventing harm.
Yeah. So, and the next one is about fairness and then cheating, of course, on the other side of it.
Yeah. And this is an interesting one. You heard Haidt talk about we all kind of see fairness as important, but if you tend to...
There are some people who
maybe don't.
But yes,
generally speaking. But kind of people who would be more liberal and people who are conservative see that differently. Whereas if you're more on the liberal side, you would be looking for more equality. You would want things to be more equal. You wouldn't want these massive inequalities between people. Whereas on the right, you see it more as proportionality, right? Mm-hmm. Which is what he was saying. Yeah. Right? If you work hard, you should be rewarded. If you don't work hard, then that's your own problem. You shouldn't. I'm not going to give you mine. I've worked for mine. You need to work for yours.
Yeah. And then the next one is very much thinking, it's kind of thinking about more of the group kind of side of this, when you're thinking about loyalty and then betrayal on the other side. So this,
and that would have been really important, in tribal societies. If there wasn't group loyalty, if you didn't look out for the people in your group, then civilization never could have been formed. You never could have created these kind of civilizations where you could specialize and you could live in really big groups. You needed this sense of loyalty. And he talks about how, if you have these kind of friendly rivalries, it can actually spur the different groups to perform better and to try harder because they want to beat the other group. So there can be some really positive things about group loyalty. But obviously, well, as a liberal, I can see the negatives, I think, much more easily than someone who has a more conservative.
Yeah, and you're clearly seeing that at work at the moment. The importance of loyalty.
Phone.
The phone. Back again. So thinking about loyalty and betrayal. I mean, we totally are seeing that at play at the moment in politics. So, I mean, literally, we actually saw this with Boris Johnson when he became Prime Minister. The loyalty test was that you had to be a true believer in Brexit. Yeah. If you weren't, some folks were kicked out of the party. So there's betrayal of that idea, and you're out. And then, of course, you're seeing it ramped to a whole nother extent in the Trump administration, where you have to believe that the 2020 election was stolen.
Or you have to say you believe it.
Or you have to say yes, and that is your loyalty test. And if you don't, then you're betraying that,
And so you
you're
can't
out.
be trusted, so you're out.
Yeah. So that loyalty betrayal thing is massively
You also,
powerful.
but you also kind of see it in the Trump Epstein thing.
Yeah.
And you don't know how far it'll go, but that has been such a thing on the right, is that, release the Epstein files. We're not going to protect people who prey on children, which is absolutely right. But now that Trump is clearly not wanting to release those files,
it is a test of loyalty.
Yes. So are they going to be loyal to him?
Yeah.
And I've seen a lot of things I'm not on Twitter, but on Threads, and you'll see a few people occasionally post, well, Clinton's in those files as well. And you can kind of see what the liberal, where we don't really value loyalty as much, where the care harm is much more important to us. And a lot of things are saying, I don't, I have no idea whether or not Clinton is guilty of anything, but if he is guilty of abusing children, then I think he should be prosecuted and he should go to jail.
Absolutely.
I don't. So so the loyalty thing is another moral foundation in Haidt's kind of social intuition model.
Now the next one, it kind of rolls on from that, because you're talking about authority and then subversion on the other side of that.
Authority,
subverting authority. So tell us.
Yes, and again, this would have been really important in terms of our evolutionary history, because in order to have these kind of massive, our bigger city-states, you would have had to have had an authority. Once things get too big, you have to, and so you have to have rules that people follow. I mean, I'm a teacher. Authority is an important thing, right? If there's no authority in my classroom, it's a little bit of a free-for-all and no learning gets done, just in a really small microcosm. So it would have been really important, and you do find that people who are more conservative will weight obedience to authority and deference to authority much more highly than someone who is liberal.
I like to tweak authority.
Yes.
For sure. I know that about myself. Indeed. I want to try and prick the bubble,
Yes. Well, and I kind of feel like I like to research things. So if there's someone's telling me something, I would want to say, I'm not sure. I'm going to go find out for myself. So I would tend to not want to just take someone else's word for something. I would want to find out for myself.
Yeah.
Which I think is, so I'm there's not a huge deference to authority.
Yes.
That's part of my makeup. Maybe there should be more, but and then the final one, or the final of the first five.
Yeah, is about
kind of purity,
sanctity, purity, and then on the other side of that, kind of degradation. You've got now this one. When you go into the kind of Old Testament in the Scripture, is huge. This idea of purity and the laws all.
And
all
it would have been
it.
really important just on a basic safety level, right? Before we had antibiotics, before we had refrigeration, before we had lots of things that protect us and keep microbes away, or protect us from harmful microbes, that you would have needed to be aware of what was safe to eat, what wasn't safe to eat, what might contaminate something. You want to keep anything that's impure out of your body, because once it gets in, there was no modern medicine, right? It would have been much harder to fight it off. So this, you can see where this kind of interest in and obsession with purity comes from. It would have been, the people who were in tune with this would have been more successful, right? They're less likely to die of. So now, of course, we kind of ascribe purity to a much wider range of things.
Well, if you went back and you think about those who had leprosy or those kind of skin conditions in the past, there are so many stories that we have in the Bible about that, and that is exactly that. So those were cast out of the community for the worry that people had about the being
contagion, right, which was dangerous, and it's a little bit more than that as well, because there's also the sanctity side of it,
Yep.
which is the religion side of it. And certainly in reading Haidt's book, and I'm going back, I haven't, but there are examples of societies, religious societies, who were able to create very complicated societal structures that were successful, and the religious aspect of it, this was part of the success of the culture, and kind of ascribing, sanctity to things, and holding things up on a pedestal can then, and you can see why it fits in with loyalty and authority. And if you weight loyalty and authority more heavily, then you the kind of sanctity, purity things are going to also, because they're all things that kind of hold groups together,
And
which is important,
it
which
is.
has been important.
Yeah, absolutely. But as with all these things, it can go too far.
And of course,
and we've seen, so part of the last couple of decades, I guess, in the Church of Scotland, we've seen a kind of movement towards greater acceptance of those in the LGBT community. But that was quite a struggle,
long process,
and it a long journey to get to that point, and a lot of sharing stories, a lot of difficult conversations and debates, and that were part of that. And I certainly remember getting correspondence through from those who would be from the more conservative side of things, and the language was absolutely cut through with this purity and degradation, and that sort of dirtiness and all that kind of language. That was clearly a massive part of what was going through the minds and driving people who were resisting a greater openness.
Well, that's always the scary thing about forming groups is really important. And being part of a group is important. And if you're part of a group, you can work together, you can help each other. But when we start really pitting one group against another, and then we start dehumanizing groups that we're not a part of, that is the root of so much of the world's ills. Of course, we were just at Auschwitz, and that's exactly what happened to the Jewish people, is that they were, very degrading language was used about that group to make people see them as less than, to not fully human. So and I think as people who would be on the left, we see that much more easily, I think, than you maybe see it. I'm not sure, and it's really difficult.
Well, we'll come back to that in the sort of moral blindness kind of thought. But the last of the kind of core moral foundations that Haidt has is about liberty and oppression. That kind of liberty on one side, oppression on the other.
Yes. Now, and I know kind of less about that. I've done less reading about that, because that's one that was an add-on for later. But I guess that makes, that's a big thing, isn't it? The freedom to do what you want, as long as it's not hurting other people, which is certainly in the kind of Haidt stuff that I've read. He talks about that can be an overriding moral foundation for people on the left, right? Is this, you're free, you should be free to do things, even if it transgresses, for example, the purity moral, as long as you're not hurting anyone. And
you think about free speech is a liberty thing, and the other side of that, the oppression, is that you're trying to be silenced. Books are getting banned, all that sort of thing is going on. People are being cancelled, all that sort of stuff is happening.
Yes, free speech for me, but not for thee, is what sometimes, and I think, to be fair, I think everyone on all sides of the political spectrum can sometimes fall into that trap. But then, of course, as someone who really highly prioritizes the care for others, are you going, and you get into the kind of paradox of tolerance, don't you? What does it look like? Free speech for Nazis, right? Free speech for people who want to commit genocide against other groups. That seems very dangerous. And it's a tricky one. These things are not easy issues, are they?
No, none of this is easy. But so those are the kind of 6 core moral foundations, and Haidt makes obviously all of these are part of all of us. So we all have a kind of,
it's like taste buds.
Yeah,
right. You have your 5 taste buds. We all experience these different salty, sweet, bitter, whatever. So we all have these moral foundations. It's just
what particularly resonates with us is different for individuals.
Yes, and it's also different between societies, right? So that's Haidt talks about early on in his career going and spending time in India, in an Indian society, and really wanting to experience it on its own terms, not as, right? Of course, it was a much more hierarchical society. Wives served the men and didn't speak, and servants that were dealt with much more harshly because the authority was really it was a strongly held value, given a lot of weight. And of course, he talks about how then he saw positives in that, whereas of course he was coming as a liberal white American. That wouldn't have been, if he'd come as a tourist, he would have denigrated those kind of things, talked about how bad they were, and he saw the value in them. Of course, my critique of that is, as a white, an affluent white male, he is never going to be on the sharp end of oppression caused by authority or loyalty to tradition or whatever. So I mean that's a tricky one. But yes, and this is part of why we have. My family I come from a very conservative family, and I have changed a lot. And so some of my family's changed with me and some hasn't. But my family that's conservative and I have very, very different views on what's happening in the States right now.
Yep.
And yet this family that I'm speaking about who are conservative are incredibly good people. Loving, and people who would do anything for you, who have given of themselves in ways that not many people would. And then, right? But yet then I look at that and then I see them supporting political parties and political decisions that cause so much harm. And I think, how? And I think they look at me and they think the same thing. How can you support this and this and this? So I think that's why we wanted to talk about kind of Haidt's ideas, to at least start to open up the conversation about, instead of saying I'm right and you're wrong, about why are we coming to such different moral conclusions? And then where do we go from here? How do we open up that? How do we start talking to people who think differently than we do, and hitting people over the head with arguments that writer isn't going to do it, because the writers aren't actually making the decisions. It's the elephants, these kind of moral intuitions that are really driving all of us. So,
and it maybe helps to explain. We were just talking a bit earlier about that, when you thinking about ourselves, and that kind of blindness that you may have to is a part of this. So that recognizing when certain buttons, certain of these core foundations are being pressed that work for us, then that's when you really get motivated and I need to do something here. I need to speak up. I need to, whatever it might be. Then it's being aware that that's what's happening to you. And the other side of that then is that there are, well, he subtitles his book, it's about good, why do good people,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
Now, he doesn't just say why do people disagree, it's why do good
people
So,
disagree. Yeah.
so what I'm assuming he's meaning by that is people that are in good faith. They're like, they're honestly trying to do the right thing as they
Yes.
understand it, but they're maybe coming to different points of view because of what their makeup of these core, the balances they have within them of these core foundations will perhaps lead them in different directions, because it's maybe like each of these is like almost like a string for a puppet. And it's
kind of pulling
it's
people
pulling you
in.
in different directions, and that.
Well, and I think it's pretty easy for us all to lose sight of the fact that the people on the other side are, for the most part, good people. And they have good intentions and they want good outcomes. And I certainly, with what's happening in the States at the moment, it's really, really hard, because then that whole, I mean, we say as liberals that we're less interested, and we do tend to weight things like loyalty and authority and purity less heavily, but yet loyalty to our group, our tribe, so Democrats would be, for us, there is more. If a Democrat makes a really good point, then you're much happier than if a Republican does it, or if a progressive makes a really good point, or whatever. There still is that there, and it can become really easy to then look at people on the other side, and they do become the other, and we do start seeing them as malevolent. And I guess some people are malevolent. I mean, there are malevolent people in the world, but I think the vast majority of people aren't. And how do we get through these really, really deep differences that we have to see the humanity and the goodness in other people, and maybe understanding how we're coming to different moral conclusions can help us to do that? Is that making sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense, and that. When what Haidt's talking about here, it's both an individual and kind of group part to this, which I appreciate in what he's saying, because a lot of other, the kind of the sort of selfish gene kind of idea, or it's just that this sort of absolute individualism driving things. But he does go, it's more nuanced than that for him, and he recognizes that, and as evolutionarily we know now, there is much more. There are drives that are community kind of drives,
social
we can start
drives behaving as hive creatures. So we're working together,
for a common end, and even though individually there might be a cost to that, ultimately it works out as being better for the community. Yeah. So the other side of that, though, is that it's when it's not good people, or those who do have kind of malevolent ends, or absolutely selfish ends. These buttons, they can be pushed to, So you see that happening. Especially with the kind of, how the fairness one can be manipulated. So we were just thinking here in the UK, there were folks out relatively small groups, but out protesting outside some hotels where
migrants
have been housed at the moment. And a big part of the one of the buttons that's been pressed is that fairness button, because the arguments,
loyalty to in-groups, I think.
Yeah, well, the fairness one I was thinking about, because the argument that is made cynically, and it's wrong, is that the immigrants are going to be using the health service, or they're taking money that is having to be spent on this, that, and
we're
the
paying
other.
for their housing, whereas
Yeah.
then there are they're British people who don't have housing.
Yeah,
That
so
kind
it's
of thing,
it's laid out as a fairness argument. So the fairness button gets pressed. Now a lot of that it's not true.
It's cynical.
Yeah, well,
it's in
the
order to
the arguments are not even true.
No.
And so but it is pressing that button and it's activating that
to get support for a particular political party. You're right.
Yeah.
Yes, although when we talk about, and of course I would look at what's happening in the States, and I think that, it's really hard to talk across the political divide because we don't actually share a common understanding of reality. And then I, as a liberal, look at that and I see kind of right-wing media that is giving one side of things, and then and it's very, and I would say, and I do believe that there's a lot of malevolence behind that, that the people calling the shots are pushing these moral foundation buttons in order to get political power to do things that are going to benefit the people at the top and not the people who are giving them the power, right? But then, of course, that is what we're talking about is it's very easy to ascribe malevolence to people who you disagree with. So it's just super complicated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because I think on the other side, conservatives would look at the mainstream media and then they would, so we see that and we see they're reporting facts. It's investigative journalism and it's long form journalism and they're going in and they're really trying to get out the facts. But then if you're on the conservative side of that, that's the mainstream media. They're lying to you and they're malevolent.
Yeah.
So it's, how do you get out of this?
Well, and that's where that finding common ground and kind of where you could kind of root things is so important, but is becoming more and more difficult. So where it would have been like here in the UK, everyone would have watched the 9 o'clock news on the BBC every night. So you'd got all that. So then when you met the next day, did you see that story? And goodness me. But now there's not that kind of stable common ground of reality or a kind of story of reality that is shared. And so then that just makes all of this more fraught.
Yes. And I think we're talking about it because we're wanting to, I guess we don't want to just be talking to people who already agree with us. Ideally you would like to feel like you could speak to people who don't agree with you, who see you as having wrong ideas about different things. And that is actually what Jonathan Haidt and his kind of co-researchers, that is one of the things that they're wanting to do, and talking about these moral foundations and talking about, getting that information out there is so that the more you're aware of the fact that you're weighting these moral foundations differently and internally, just because of how your own makeup is, and you're also weighting them differently, perhaps because of the kind of cultural groups that you've grown up in. And if you understand this and you understand how the moral intuitions are driving things, not your reasoning, that you're more able to catch yourself, but you're also more able to give grace to other people. And he does actually, I was looking it up and I registered a long time ago. They do have a website, www.yourmorals.org, where you can go on, you can sign up, and you can kind of take a variety of different surveys and questionnaires. But of course, the first one it's looking at, it's really the first 5 moral foundations. They leave off liberty, although there are 6 things that are weighted because they split up the fairness. They don't have fairness. They split it up into questions looking at equality and questions looking at proportionality, because liberals and conservatives would see fairness differently. So it might be worth going and having a look. I just retook it and I did come up higher than average on care And
so it gives you a score for each of these
it
different
gives you a
things.
score out of 5, and then it shows you where you fall compared to the average person who's taken. So I come up higher than average weight, higher than average on care, higher than average on equality, lower than average on authority and loyalty, and then really about average on purity and proportionality.
And that, I mean, that's partly the thing that Haidt talks about in for those who are more progressive liberal kind of minded in this kind of morality framework, are at a disadvantage.
Yes.
To the more conservatively minded person who generally would kind of have a more even balance of across all of them. So then in politics or in religious institutions, then that there is a weighting towards a more conservative kind of way of
well, they're just more there are more topics that you
that
can
will hit the buttons
for people who are more conservative, and then there are fewer. And of course, he is saying, in our evolutionary history, all of these were important. So he does, and I think he speaks as someone who would probably still consider himself liberal. That the kind of liberal morality is a much more narrow one, and it misses out on important things. I mean, I think that's harder for me to see. I'd need to. I mean, I understand what he's saying, but then I feel like, but how is anything more important than caring for people and preventing harm? It just feels self-evident to me that that's the most important thing.
Yeah.
So it's obviously not for others.
Yeah. So I mean that really brings me in my own thoughts then to, because I certainly remember when reading the book originally thinking, I wonder where Jesus would kind of fall in this whole thing. And, because I could see parts of it where I'm like, oh, he's clearly would be, this would be something that would be really a powerful driver there. But, there would be a spread across. I was just having a look again through the list myself and just thinking, right, which way, where would he be going? But, I mean, it does make... So a huge part of what Jesus was doing was about trying to help people express, he described it as the kingdom of God, right?
And,
so it's
kind of creating the kingdom of God here on earth.
Yeah, so it's
people.
What a society could be, in a kind of model of a society of how people would live together. And the other thing that was key in what he was doing is that he was speaking, it's obviously it was in a particular context and all of that, but mostly he was speaking to peasants. He was out and about in the countryside, and so many of his stories that he told are within that context, that it would be absolutely rooted in the understanding of folks. The stories are usually pretty simple and straightforward, the parables that he would tell. And for those original listeners, they would have got it, what he was driving at. There's the problem we have now when we listen to what Jesus is doing, and this is partly when you mentioned in our first episode of this, your frustration and to see how Jesus is being taken and used
in ways that seem really antithetical to who he was.
Yeah.
And the message that he came to bring. Yeah.
So a couple of examples from his stories, parables. We've got the parable of the Good Samaritan, which is a massively well-known parable of his. So if you don't know the parable of the Good Samaritan, it's a story that Jesus told in response to a question. But and it's a story about a Jewish man who's traveling on the road, gets attacked by robbers, left on the side of the road, and then two people walk by,
Religious
priest
leaders
and a Levite, walk by on the other side of the road.
and are too busy to do anything to help.
Yeah. And then the
A
third
Samaritan
person is a
comes.
Samaritan. So it's somebody from Samaria was these were not the friends. It was a different tribe. This is exactly what we're talking about, the them and us. This is somebody we don't trust. They're a
don't
different
like.
group. They're
They're
impure.
yes.
They're
Yeah.
out. They're the outsiders and all of that sort of stuff.
And we want to keep it that way.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
it's the Samaritan who helps the Jewish man.
Yeah.
Who kind of takes him, tends his wounds, takes him to an inn, pays for him to be taken care of there while he recuperates.
So the sort of, usually when that story is being told and the kind of unpacking of that story, the unpacking of the story is, so shouldn't we all just be like the Good Samaritan and look out for each other, right? Which is kind of how, and so that's kind of playing into the sort of care, harm, and justice and that sort of thing. But for those who would have been, part of that community and hearing this for the first time, and maybe would identify with the different characters in a way that we're a step removed from it all, so it's harder for us to understand who this is. But
they would have identified probably with the Jewish traveler, right? Who, because they were Jewish, who was attacked. You maybe would have had some of the religious leaders who saw themselves in.
Yeah, well, so that's where the kind of critique comes in, that really the subversion in the parable is that those who were the elite,
the authorities,
those who were with all the authority, but along with that authority came responsibility. So within the law, the Jewish law, there were all these rules about how you were to treat folks who were in harm. They were in a difficult position. Those who were poor, impoverished, widows, orphans. There were all these rules about what you were supposed to do. And here were two people who they knew what they were supposed to do, and they didn't do it. And the one who was the outsider, the one who was not part of that community, is the one that did it. So it's a slashing critique of the hierarchy of the day.
Yes, well, it is interesting. And in Haidt's work, he talks about the authority a bit, and is talking about like the basis of that isn't as liberals would tend to see it as oppression and taking advantage of and whatever. This authority moral foundation is grounded in the idea of, yes, there are groups of people who do have more authority, but they also then, as you just said, have responsibility as well. And so this authority moral foundation isn't working well when the people in authority don't fulfill their responsibilities.
Yeah.
So perhaps you would, I feel like I look at a lot of Jesus's things and then think, they're really critiquing the things that conservatives find
indeed
helpful. And then makes me feel better about being liberal. But actually, perhaps what he was really doing was critiquing the falling down of that particular moral basis, right? So when that moral basis isn't working well, right, when the people in authority aren't fulfilling their responsibilities to care for others and to create a fairer society and to meet needs, then that's the problem with authority. It's not just authority. Anyway, it's an idea.
Yeah, indeed. No, I'm sure that's, because so much of, what he was trying to do was show people the way it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
This is kind of the way it's. So there, I remember reading, it was an MP, I think, talking about this story, the story of the Good Samaritan, and using it as a way to defend capitalism, because it was only because that Samaritan had the wealth and the means to be able to bring that, to pay for the inn for that person. So really, it's a story about why we should open the markets.
I really don't think Jesus was about capitalism.
Yeah, well, but this is how these stories can be used.
But I do think he was critiquing our othering of people.
Yeah.
And I think that's what you see. That does seem to be a theme throughout. If you think about the Sermon on the Mount, that we're talking about all of these groups, and it's the groups who are at the bottom of society and the groups that we look down on, who are the ones that
should be happy, that are lifted up.
That he's lifting up.
Blessed are they.
So I certainly think there is this critique about, and I think that that's fair enough, because when you can see how in-group loyalty is an important thing, but when it goes too far, it creates real damage. And it can feels like it can easily, even as a teacher, you see our group, your group, we don't want your group. And that's can be the basis of a lot of conflict, even just on the playground. So it's something we need to be careful with, I think.
So in 1988, Margaret Thatcher, who was the Prime Minister at the time, came to the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland and famously gave what some labelled as the Sermon on the Mound.
Oh, right.
So the Mound, if you don't know, in Edinburgh is the big it's the lump that the castle sits on, and the assembly halls for the Church of Scotland are just nearby. And I went and reread what she said earlier today, just because I was pretty sure she made some comment about the parable of Jesus, and she does. She describes the parable of the talents, just a kind of slightly throw off line, but it's similarly though to that other MP, in that the parable of the talents was about seeking after productivity. It was to do something good with that. Again, culturally, for the audience that Jesus was telling these stories to a peasant audience, the story of the parable of the talents is, there are two versions of it in the Matthew and Luke's gospel, but the basic idea is that there's the head of the house, a very affluent house, gives a certain amount of resources to three of his underlings. 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent. Now, a talent is vast sum of money. So the 5 talents would be equivalent to 100 years of an average salary, worker's salary. So colossal amount. So Jesus is telling a story that's clearly hyperbolic. It's over the top, making folks, woo, what is going on here? The 2 of these underlings, they use the money. They go out and do things, and they double the money, so they make 100% profit on it. The third one hides the money, hides the talent,
because he's afraid he'll lose it and then be punished.
And then be punished for it. So, and how Margaret Thatcher used it is, see, the ones that are put on the pedestal are the ones who have used their resources to create more. They've done more. And the third one is discarded as being useless. But culturally, in that time, very like a kind of feudal system, as we might understand it, in the kind of UK context. These landowners, so the ones who had all this wealth, they could use that wealth to manipulate those who are below it. So they would use that wealth to give out loans, and they'd give out those loans at rates that were exorbitant rates, and then in the hope that these folks would fail on these, and they'd be able to take their property and any land that they might have. So they would just expand and expand what they had. So the two servants who do well in this story are the ones who play that same game. So they take that money and they use that money to make more and more and more, and then skim off some for themselves, no doubt. But they give the profit that the landowner is wanting out of it. The third one, though, decides not to play the game and says, I'm not going to use my resources to do the dirty for those who are already impoverished or in a difficult position. So normally when we tell that parable is usually being told, it is in that kind of understanding, oh yeah, no, it's a good Protestant work ethic, we should be working hard and blah 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 blah,
or just using your
or using your
talents.
gifts.
Yes,
Yeah, exactly. How would
heard.
you use it that way. And the kind of the key to that should make you think, because Jesus there's this subversive part, so that's why that on the subversion kind of scale here, authority subversion. I'm thinking, Jesus is definitely zips around on that kind of line. Is that the landowner at the end of the parable is cast off the one to damnation, that they're cast out to weeping and gnashing of teeth. It's in that parable that phrase comes. Does that sound like Jesus? Does that sound like how he describes God? No, it doesn't. So that kind of allegorization of, oh well, God is obviously the landowner in this, falls apart. And then if that falls apart, you're like, right, well, who is the focus in the story? Well, clearly the focus in the story is the third because there's more time spent on the third one than anyone else. So what really was going on? And is it a critique of what was happening at the time in society for his look? And again, this is what a society should be like. This is what a moral society that I would be wanting to drive people is, where we're looking out for each other. We're not trying to profit over the others, taking advantage over others. Yeah,
that puts a whole new spin on that parable.
Yeah, Herzog. He's an author, a theologian, who writes about the parables of subversion, and how Jesus uses stories of parables to subvert the status quo and the understanding of morality in that time.
As good liberals, we love that subversion, don't we?
I sure do. So, yeah. But it's how I find it really interesting because the kingdom of God is not about the status quo as we kind of understand it but so often it is being hijacked or adopted in order to try and defend a particular way of life or a particular moral framework, and Jesus would be twisting that around left and center.
Yes, well, I certainly, as someone who grew up in a conservative Christian background, that whole purity thing is a really big through line. Kind of purity in terms of seeing the Bible as inerrant, and purity in terms of your individuality, your personal self, purity in terms of your church group. You can't step outside of the line, and purity it does feel like Jesus in his life was really pushing against that idea of we need to keep ourselves pure, we need to keep our groups pure, because he wanted to expand this kingdom of God, and it was the kind of the least of these, right, that he really focused on. And of course, when you get to Paul, it then really we're expanding out. In Jesus, there's no male or female, slave or free. so it does feel like there is a lot of subversion of certainly that particular moral foundation in the life and teachings of Jesus. But then I guess,
which gives, well, I mean, it gives for us coming from a kind of faith perspective, it gives on top of thinking about what Jonathan Haidt is saying, it gives this other kind of perspective on where we're coming from.
But of course, I think you always have to close with the acknowledgement that if you're using this moral framework, and when you're reading Haidt's book, there's a lot of experimental evidence, that this kind of elephant rider thing is going on.
Yeah.
Our elephants really are leaning towards certain moral foundations, and so that that certainly is the lens through which we are interpreting the life and ministry of Jesus.
For sure, and you're it's a constant journey trying to weave your way around that and trying
Which
to get
is
some
why,
kind of I guess it's finding the areas of consistency of where it all things kind of match up together, where you get that kind of.
But I think it's also why it's good to try to find a way to talk to people who disagree with you, and actually having a shared understanding of these moral foundations and how we weight them differently can maybe help us to have that conversation, and then also to be aware of which direction our respective elephants are leaning, and then how our respective riders are trying to justify our own moral intuitions, and denigrate the moral intuitions that we disagree with. And then, because I just feel like in general society at the moment, we need to find ways to talk with people we disagree with.
Absolutely.
Or it's just going to get more and more polarized, and we can see that that's not leading us anywhere good.
Well, that's Jonathan Haidt, and these foundations, these core foundations, helpful.
Yep.
But maybe that's been useful for folks getting, hearing a bit about those. And of course, you can always read more about that.
Yeah, definitely worth a read. And go to the yourmorals.org website and kind of see where you fall on these different scales.
Okay, back in a mo.
Okay, so coming back, we were I thought we could think a little bit about a question I got from someone who is on the other side of the political spectrum from me in the States. He's someone that I've had conversations, we went to high school together. He's someone I've had conversations with over kind of Facebook Messenger, and some really good conversations where we've kind of been able to talk really productively and see each other's point of views, and then some conversations that haven't been so great. But he asked, just sent me a message and asked, you're in the UK. I've seen a lot about problems in the UK are really bad with the Muslim community. And is that right? So like I just kind of wrote back, from my perspective as a teacher, I'm, the whole time I've taught over here, I've had, Aberdeen is really quite, with all of the oil and things up here, it's quite multicultural, a lot of families from different countries. So I've taught kids from lots of different countries, most years taught kids that are Muslim, kids that are Hindu, kids that are Christian, kids that have no kind of religious background. And generally, they're all just kids, and they're nice kids, and their parents are nice, and they're friends with each other without kind of any worries about having different faith backgrounds. So kind of what I told him was, no. There's a lot of disinformation online, and I think it's pushed by a lot of bots to kind of stir up fear of the other, thinking about loyalty, kind of in group, that as a moral foundation, to stir up that fear of Muslims are different than we are. They're the other. They're scary. They're taking over, which just isn't true. So yeah, I and that is a really, when we talk about people who are maybe malevolent and who are aware that this is a button that can be pressed to stir up anger, to stir up fear, to then get power. And I feel like that's some of what's going on.
That is definitely going on. It's not just in the United States. So that rhetoric is being used in politics here.
Yeah.
And there's this, it's called the Overton window, isn't it? So it's the kind of the window of what is sort of, and comes down to what we were talking about earlier about the kind of common ground and the kind of, sort of accepted kind of areas of where, we kind of generally sort of agree that these are the areas in which we're conversing and talking about things. And there's a kind of, a window from one side to the other here.
And it really used to be Nazis were outside of that window, and you couldn't say Nazis were good. That was outside
or fascists,
of the Overton window.
This was
but unfortunately.
And probably on the other side, during all the Cold War and that, you would have said communists. On the kind of left side would also have been outside of that, the Overton window, the kind of accepted kind of area of discourse within
range of acceptable viewpoints.
Yeah, and what we've seen over the last few decades is that Overton window shifting towards the right. So what would have been talk that when I was a student down in London, there was at that time kind of these kind of far right groups that would have been the National Front and things like that at that time would have been way out of that Overton window. But when I think about what they were saying then in the 90s, well, late 80s, 90s, early 90s, that is now, you easily would hear that coming from so what would be a mainstream party, the Conservative Party here in the United Kingdom, from folks there. The same kind of things, especially towards immigration.
Yeah, and you see that in the States, because if you go back and you look at Reagan and George H.W. Bush talking about immigration, I mean, they sound like a pretty liberal Democrat now. And so the way they talked about immigration is vastly different than the way Trump and the current Republican Party talks about immigration.
I mentioned earlier that I'd reread Margaret Thatcher's Sermon on the Mount. I don't do this often, that kind of thing.
Your kids will disown you.
Listen to this. So this is what she said. To assert absolute moral values is not to claim perfection for ourselves. No true Christian could do that. What is more, one of the great principles of our Judaic-Christian inheritance is tolerance.
Gosh, from Maggie Thatcher.
From Maggie Thatcher. People with other faiths and cultures have always been welcomed in our land, assured of equality under the law, of proper respect and of open friendship. There's absolutely nothing incompatible between this and our desire to maintain the essence of our own identity. There is no place for racial or religious intolerance in our creed.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
you can't. Honestly, sometimes I wonder if our current Prime Minister would say that.
Saying that. I mean, yeah, I don't want to dump. I mean, I have my problems with Labour. I don't want to pile on Labour because I think they're doing a rough job with or a good job with
in
a rough time. But I do think that Labour is in this.
Well, this is the shifting of the Overton window.
So that they feel like they have to say things that are much more right-wing than obviously Margaret Thatcher was saying 35 years ago. So that's quite depressing, isn't it?
I read that and was kind of, whoa, I had forgotten that.
But anyway, so I just feel like this people being aware that there is a lot of disinformation out there about that is really trying to push these buttons to make you afraid in order to other already marginalized groups in order. And the reason we do that is to get power, I think just being aware of that as something that is definitely taking place is a good thing.
So, third segment. We mentioned last week, South Park, that the first episode of the new season had been released and that it was an absolutely cutting,
vicious
satire.
I mean, deservedly so.
Yeah.
I didn't think anything was said that wasn't fair enough, but it was pretty hardcore.
So, South Park it is part of a kind of cultural milieu because it's been around for 27 years, for a long time, and but if you've never seen it, you might. The characters you'll recognise because they appear all over the place.
Yeah, they're just part of
culture now, but maybe wouldn't recognise just how satirical the show has always been. It has always been critiquing folks on whatever's
going on.
Yeah. So and whether it's celebrities or politics from any party, everyone was
everyone's fair game.
Everyone was fair game for them, and it is ribald and definitely not for children.
No,
to be watching. There is a second episode of this new season that's just coming out. I think it's tonight. It's coming out here in the UK. I mean, we've seen kind of bits of this one,
clips of it and things.
And it is again an absolutely. I mean, they are going completely to the bone, and this time it's tackling both the kind of culture around celebrity kind of podcast YouTubers and the influence that they are having, particularly on the right wing, and the other part of it is a critique of ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement.
I think so.
So if you've been watching the news, that is the when you're seeing the groups that are all with the masks on, that are doing these raids on schools,
and
farms, shops, and of that, and just picking off people who are usually or with darker coloured skin.
Yep.
Let's be honest about what's going on here. And these folks are getting deported out of the country or put into what are almost camps.
Feels like
they look like
detainment
concentration
centers,
camps. Yeah, indeed.
Horrendous conditions
and that's being driven by a completely arbitrary figure of there need to be 3,000 arrests per day that has been set by Stephen Miller,
and there aren't that many immigrant criminals in the States to meet that.
Yeah, so that's, again, going back to what we were saying originally about the buttons that were being pressed in the lead up to the election. A lot of it was on the kind of on justice, that we want to
fairness
and fairness. These are folks that have cheated.
Yeah.
They've illegally entered the country.
Should have come in the right way.
Yeah, and they are, and a huge amount of the rhetoric of Donald Trump was all around that these are murderers and all this sort of stuff. The reality is that was never the case. Folks may have entered illegally, but like it was here in the United Kingdom in the last few years, there were no legal ways to get in. They had all been stopped. And so the only way for folks to bring about an appeal for asylum was to get into the country illegally. So anyway.
But
it's
of course, what's happening in the States at the moment is a lot of people who've come in legally, who have legal status, that status is being pulled away from them. And so now they're illegal, but they came in, they followed all the rules.
It's U.S. citizens are now getting rounded up in this as it's developing. So that's all going on. And that's Kristi Noem, who's the head of Homeland Security, is absolutely targeted in this episode of South Park.
Deservedly so.
Oh, absolutely. She seems like quite the character, shall we say. But don't leave your dog near her, is all I can say. You can read more about that if you don't know what I'm talking about. But what was on my mind is just thinking about how do you do satire in the current times? So South Park are being able to do it effectively, though they must be on unbelievable pressure. I mean, the White House itself is coming out with statements about each issue, each episode that's coming out.
And I think this episode 2 was delayed because of episode 1, and which is crazy in America. If you can't satirize your political leaders, you don't live in a democracy. Yeah. Right? That's part and parcel of a free and open society, is you are allowed to criticize your leaders because you have the right to remove them from power.
You are allowed to make jokes about your political leaders. You're allowed to...
No matter who they are.
Indeed, yeah.
So that's quite worrying.
And then, so of course, here in the United Kingdom, there was a retired head teacher who was on a march. Well, it wasn't a march; it was just a protest related to Palestine. And
so I think it's particularly Palestine Action. Is it?
Well,
no, was it not?
I'm not sure for the one that he was at, but the what was on his side, he had a sign that had on it a reference to Palestine Action, but it wasn't a reference to the group. It was just a reference actually to what counts as action in Palestine, I think.
Right.
And it was a joke that was from Private Eye. Copy of it here. And because it mentioned Palestine action in the joke, he was arrested.
That's crazy. I mean, that's just crazy.
It's nuts. This is kind of one of the issues after it, which there's a wee cartoon that says has a guy with a placard in front of a judge, says, "How do you plead, satirical or not satirical?"
Yeah.
So. Yeah, it was Palestine Action Explained. It was what it said at the top. Now, subsequent to that, the gag was about that. The reason why this particular group, Palestine Action, which is a group here in the United Kingdom, has been classified as a terrorist organization is because they had spray painted some military planes.
Yeah.
And so the joke was that it's unacceptable Palestine Action spray painting some military planes, acceptable Palestine Action murdering children who are waiting for food.
Yeah, I mean,
and so
it's just
that was the gag, this guy was arrested for that. And so, what place satire in these times? And that is a clear shift of that Overton window.
Because this is a Labour government. I find that really, really worrying.
Yeah, it is deeply, deeply troubling. And for just what we're talking about, freedom of expression, of being able to speak, and the freedom to protest is a part of democracy. That it is absolutely foundational.
Because our political leaders are supposed to be representing us and doing what the people want them to be doing. And so
government is for the people, by the people, and of the people. Abraham Lincoln. So
you have to be able, if your government is doing things that you don't want done in your name, you have to be able to protest that.
Yeah.
You have to be able to speak out. I mean, satire is so
and that's across
important.
the political spectrum.
Absolutely.
That's for anyone in the political spectrum to be able to come out and say, yep.
So here we are, good liberals not being loyal. Since I was a Labour voter in this past election, but I think it's absolutely not acceptable that we're criminalizing. I mean, as terrorist organization, an organization that's really wanting us to protect innocent lives in Palestine, I mean, that's so, gosh.
And we're seeing that same thing happen with groups that are doing action related to climate change as well, that this has been criminalized. Now, if folks do criminal activity, that's fine.
Fair enough.
Then arrest them.
There should be consequences for that.
Yeah, but being associated and just protesting, that's a whole different thing.
It has to be okay in a democracy,
Indeed.
in a kind of free society.
What kind of world, huh?
Indeed.
Okay. Well, that's us for this week.
Think, yeah.
So quite a lot of foundational stuff. We'll see where we go next week.
Sounds good.
All right.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.